always, hey Latin 2 students. It's good to be back with you guys again today. We did our vocabulary yesterday for chapter 34. So today I want to take you through the chapter so you can get this down into your notes section and know what to look for in the chapter coming up. This chapter continues last chapter. Last chapter we learned how to make comparative and superlative forms of adjectives. This chapter is about a few irregular instances of comparative and superlative adjectives. So I'll take you through it. Remember to take your time, make sure you understand, and it's a video, so pause it if I'm going too fast or you need to go back over something, you should always do that. And if at the end of the notes there's a little something you don't understand, make sure to check in with me during my office hours or send me a message so I can help clear up any confusion you have, because I can't take your questions here like I usually do. So I love seeing you guys during my office hours. Okay, so this chapter is about, again, special types of comparison that we'll deal with today. You can see those here, and I'll explain what these mean in the notes. And then, of course, a new construction that is dative with special adjectives or certain adjectives, and I'll go over that with you as well. Okay. So the first section here is a few types of words that have irregular superlatives. Okay, and the first type of these words is adjectives ending in R. This would be any adjective ending in R. It could be first and second declension, like pulcher, or it could be third declension, like acer or keller. So how are these irregular? Well, they're only irregular in their superlative forms. So the normal superlative ending for an adjective is issimus on the end of its base, right? So we did like altissimus or a lot of other adjectives last chapter. The irregularity here is that if an adjective ends in R in its masculine form, then the superlative form will be rimus. It'll add rimus to the end of the masculine, right? So pulcherimus, acerimus. If this were not irregular, you would expect the superlative to be pulchrissimus, okay? But this is an irregularity. This goes for any adjective that ends in R, okay? So pulcherimus means very beautiful, extremely beautiful, the most beautiful, etc. The meanings are still exactly the same as we learned last chapter. What's different is the irregular forms. So on a quiz, if I asked you for the superlative of keller, you would not want to tell me kellerissimus, because this is irregular. It should be kellerimus, okay? Notice how the R is doubled up. So the R is there from the actual word, and then the rimus is there for the superlative ending. I do want to note that these adjectives are regular in the comparative form. This is only a superlative irregularity. So for example, the comparative here would be pulchrior, that's normal, or pulchrius in the neuter. Same thing here, acrior, acrius would be the comparative form. Okay. The next form of irregular words would be another superlative, and that would be certain adjectives ending whose base ends in L. Notice how it's not every adjective, but certain adjectives whose base ends in L. And we're going to learn 4 of these irregular adjectives this chapter. Okay, excuse me, went too far. So these adjectives are focalist, difficilist, similist, and dissimilist. All words we learned this year, and notice how the base ends in L. There are some other words who have the same ending, but they don't follow this irregularity. That's the tricky part here. Here, it's every adjective ending in R. It's kind of easy to remember. Here, it's these 4 specific words, and a few others we haven't learned, but we won't go over those today. So what they do, it's kind of similar. They form their superlative by adding limus, L-I-M-U-S, to the base of the adjective. Rather than rimus up here, it adds limus. Notice how there's a double L. You see the double R here. There's some similarity. So facilimus would mean very easy or easiest or extremely easy. Again, if this were regular, you would expect facilissimus to be the superlative, but rather it is facilimus, okay? So these 4 adjectives are the ones you want to learn that follow this particular irregularity. Difficilis goes to difficilimus, similis goes to similimus, that would mean like very similar or the most similar, and then dissimilis, which we learned yesterday, goes to dissimilimus, okay? So those are a couple of irregularities you want to kind of make note of and practice. The whole enchilada, excuse me, I forgot I had that clapping there. The whole enchilada, which you guys know means like the summary of everything we just talked about. These words are irregular in the comparative, but irregular in the superlative. Here's the ones that end in R, and here's the ones that end in L in their base. Okay, so this is the irregular part. You might want to pause it on this slide and make sure you understand this before moving on. Okay, and we'll practice that this week and next week as we learn chapter 34. The next irregularities are a smaller set of words, but it's quite irregular. This would be any adjective ending in EUS or IUS, okay? And if you think of, there's some adjectives in English that are very irregular, right? What I mean is they don't even have an ending. Like a regular comparative in English would be like, um, tall, taller, tallest. That's a very regular. It adds er, then it adds est. That's how you make the comparative and superlative. There's some that are regular, like good, better, best. That's pretty regular, right? And there's some that don't even have an ending, but they're so regular that they actually add a word in front of the comparative and superlative to make their comparative superlative forms. Okay, so for example, the word famous. You never say that she is famouser than him. That's just not how that word forms as comparative. You say more famous, okay? Same thing with famousest is not the correct word, but most famous is the correct word. So the reason I tell you that is to denote that there's some Latin words that work in a very similar way in that they add a word to the beginning to make them comparative rather than the normal ior or isimus comparative and superlative endings, okay? And in fact, there's only 2 words we learn in this chapter, and in the whole book so far that fit into this rule, and I'll tell you what the 2 words are, in just a second. So what do these words do to make their comparative and superlative? Instead of adding an ending of eor, these words include the word magis before the word. Just like in English, when you say more famous, magis is that word meaning more, right? So the superlative form, in front of the word, you will see maxime. That's like the word meaning most, basically. And again, these are separate words in front of one of these adjectives. Now, which adjective does this apply to? One of them is a word we learned yesterday. Actually, I think we learned both of them yesterday, which is adonius. Adonius means suitable, okay? Now, if this were a regular adjective, you would expect the comparative to be something like idonior or something like that. But again, not regular. If it ends in EUS, it follows this rule, or if it's an adjective ends in IUS, follows this rule. Here's the 2 instances. So I have not seen a place magis adonium. This is comparative because magis is comparative. It means more. So I have not seen a place more suitable. Okay. Now that's important because on the quiz, you're going to want to, avoid the temptation to just say, oh, the comparative would be adonior, because that's what normal words do. You have to learn the irregularities this chapter. Okay. Another example with this word in it would be aureus, which we also learned in this chapter, which means golden. Okay. It's probably a little bit less common just because you don't often say this is more golden than that, but technically it could be. So if something is more golden, it would be magis aureus. And if something is very golden or the most golden, you would say maxime aureus. Okay. By the way, these words magis and maxime do not change form. They don't decline or conjugate. So they will just be in front of the adjective. Adonius will still decline into its correct case, but these words do not change. Here's one more example. Haec concilia sunt maxime adonia. What degree do we have here? Maxime. This makes this word superlative. So these plans are most suitable, right? So magis adonium being the comparative, maxime adonia being the superlative. Notice how adonia here, the ending is agreeing with concilia, so it's neuter nominative plural. So these are ones that only 2 adjectives you need to know right now to follow this rule. There's a few more, but only 2 we've learned in our book so far. Now, the next thing we have this chapter is kind of unrelated. It's kind of a separate thing, but a very common thing. And this is adjectives that take the dative. And I want you to look on page 195 for this, because this is one area where it would help you to look in the book. And there's a list of adjectives that take the dative. What do I mean by take the dative? Well, there's certain adjectives that the dative just naturally completes their meaning in Latin. It just makes sense, right? And most of these are words we learned before. If you look at that list on page 195, this is the list that says dative with adjectives. If you can pause it and turn there with me on page 195, you see the word amicus, which means friendly. So what do I mean by the word friendly takes the dative? Well, what that means is if you're friendly to someone, like she was friendly to her mother, that would take the dative. Friendly to her mother, mother would be dative, okay? Same thing with inimicus, which means hostile or unfriendly. If you were hostile to someone, that person that comes after the adjective will be in the dative. So these are your adjectives here that take the dative. So this is something to look at very closely this chapter. You have to know specifically, okay, which adjective takes the dative, because not all even make sense in the dative. The adjective big. Magnus doesn't make sense in the dative, but some do. Here's one that does, and here's some examples I'm going to give you, and you can look at these examples and pause it to look more closely. Hoc concilium erat gratum omnibus. Gratum is from gratius, a word we learned previously, and gratus means pleasing or grateful, but pleasing is most common. So pleasing takes the dative. This plan was pleasing to all or to everyone, right? So the dative here completes the word gratus, pleasing to everyone. So that's where the dative comes in. It completes the meaning there. Another example here, tu clare non est par mihi. For each of these sentences, I'd recommend pausing it for a second, see if you can come up with a translation. That'll help your translation practice, and then you can press play and see how I translate it. That'd be, because in class, I normally ask you guys to translate these when we're together. Do you recognize this as the adverb, hopefully? So this is something I say to people all the time, just so they know. Tu clare non est par mihi. Par means equal. We learned it yesterday, I think. And if you're equal to someone, that takes the dative. So it's a polite thing to tell people, you clearly are not equal to me. Mihi is dative. On the quiz, if I asked you, hey, why is mihi dative? What's the use of that dative? It's dative with a special adjective, okay, or dative with an adjective. Another example is friendly, which we saw a minute ago. What degree is amicissimo? It is superlative, right? So here it's not just friendly, but I love a person, or I like a person very friendly to many. Friendly to many people, okay? So that's what I said here. This is a substantive, friendly to many. Here's one with some historical people in it. Labienus non jam erat fidelis Caesari. Fidelis, we learned yesterday, means faithful, right? Most of these kind of just sound like they make sense with the dative, right? Like you're faithful to someone. That's a dative thing. So labienus was not, non jam erat, non jam means no longer, I should say. So labienus was no longer faithful to Caesar. Caesar is dative because it's going with the adjective fidelis, okay? Now these adjectives, they still are going to agree with whatever word they modify. So here, par is modifying to, so it's nominative, and here, amicissimum is modifying homonym, which is accusative, so the adjective is accusative. So the adjectives still operate in the same way. Okay? And one more example. I don't have an example for every single one on page 195, so you want to look there at the examples they give and study the words on page 195 specifically. We also have facilis, difficilis, fidelis, finitimus, gratis, idonius, notus, par, propior, propinquus, proximus, similis, dissimilis, and utilis. These are all adjectives that take the dative. And most of these, some of these are words we learned in this specific chapter, some of them we learned in a previous chapter. So you can go back and review the vocab if there's one you've forgotten. Habito in villa proxima flumini pulcherrimo. This is the word proxima, which we learned yesterday, which means next to or nearest. So I live in a farmhouse next to a very beautiful river, right? Next to something takes the dative. So that's why flumini is dative. This is also dative modifying the river, okay? And what degree is pulcherrimo? That's just a nice little aside here. It is superlative. We just learned how to make that superlative today, pulcherrimo, okay? So those are called special adjectives to take the dative. They're going to be a big part of the next quiz, so make sure you put that as part of your study. A couple vocabulary notes as we start rounding out the chapter here. Propinquus, propio, and proximus. Those are three separate vocabs we learned yesterday, but basically they kind of form an irregular comparison, right? They're kind of three separate words, but their meanings are taken together. So propinquus means near, propio means nearer, and proximus means nearest, even though they don't exactly look like each other. So you want to kind of put these three words together as you study your vocabulary. In other words, propinquus does not become comparative in the normal way. There is no word propinquior. If you wanted to say nearer, you would use propior or propius. Okay, so that's a little note there. And then a couple last things on the word study. And these are like just details about the vocab we learned yesterday. And I'll give you some examples and some idioms and things like that. And this is also mentioned on page 196 in your book. A note about the word cupidus, which means like desirous or wanting. We learned this word yesterday. A quick note is that word typically takes a genitive after it. So if you're desirous of something, that would be typically go into the genitive case, right? So nos omnes sumus cupidi vitae longae felicisque. And so if you're desirous of something, that's why this word is genitive vitae. So here, we are all desirous of a long and happy life. Desirous of something. That's kind of similar how we would say in English too. So this doesn't seem that crazy or irregular or something. Dumnodix erat cupidus rerum novarum. Dumnorix was desirous. Do you guys remember rerum novarum? You learned that idiom a few chapters ago. He was desirous of revolution. So again, the genitive being taken here with these words. Okay, and that's actually a line from Caesar's Gallic War commentary on the Gallic Wars, which some of you will read in AP Latin someday. Posterus is commonly used in a couple time idioms I want to tell you about right now. The first one is postero die. We know that postero can mean following or next. When it's used with postero die, it's a common idiom meaning on the following day or the next day. And notice how these words are ablative, because this would be like an ablative of time construction, right? On the following day. Another idiom that you'll see sometimes, I don't know if these are idioms so much as they're just common expressions that you should be aware of and be used to. Postero anno, in the next year or the following year. Again, ablative, because you're talking about specific ablative of time. Okay? But nota bene, which means note well, there's a couple idioms that are, I should call these substantives that are used here. If the word posterus is used substantively, in other words, used by itself as an adjective, this word, of course, we just talked about, means next or following. But if it's used all alone, like a substantive, posteri means descendants or posterity, which kind of makes sense because they're the ones who follow you as your descendants or posterity, right? But if you see it used alone, posteri is a substantive meaning descendants. Same thing with the word propinquus, which also means a near. But if it's ever used as a noun, if it's ever used as a substantive all by itself and it's not modifying something else, it means relative, relation, or kinsman. Okay, so these words both can be used as nouns, as substantives in the way we see here. So those are a couple of vocab notes. And lastly, I just wanted to give you a recap of some of the derivatives from yesterday. Some of these I already mentioned yesterday on the vocab, but I just thought I'd show you my slide here that kind of gives some examples and goes into more detail. And if you're interested in one of these words, you can pause it. But I mentioned the word ambidextrous, which comes from dexter, meaning right, means using both hands with equal ease, or it can mean someone who's unusually skillful at something. It comes from dexter, meaning right, and ambo, meaning both. The word Adonius I mentioned was an English word. Notice how it's spelled slightly differently than the Latin word, but it basically means the same thing as it means in Latin. It means appropriate or suitable or good fit. I mentioned to you yesterday that nisi was a legal phrase, and again, I'm sure there's some legal details here, but this is just general what this word can mean in some circumstances. There's probably some other legal ways this can be used, but nisi can mean not yet final or taking effect at a later date unless invalidated by a certain clause. So interesting how some Latin things that are used in the law or legal phrases that have come into wide use, and legal professionals would know what they mean today. And this last one I think I mentioned yesterday, propinquity, can mean just near someone, but more likely it means nearness of blood. So if you have propinquity with someone, you're talking about, I think we're related to each other by blood. Okay. And finally, we'll wrap up, guys, with the sententia antiqua. These are Latin sentences that I like to give you from time to time. And they're from real Roman authors or ancient phrases using words we learned this chapter. Just kind of give you some real Latin from ancient times to chew on and try to translate. Try to think about how you would translate these and pause it and then see what I say as the translation. The first one is omnes cupiunt pulcherrima atque utilissima dona dare. Do you recognize the word from this chapter? Well, here we have the irregular superlative pulcherrima, right? And this is an anonymous ancient phrase, right? But it's a good phrase. Omnes cupiunt. Everyone or all desire to give very beautiful and very useful gifts, right? So when you give a gift, you want to give something that's very useful and very beautiful. So that's a good phrase to hang on even for today. This next one is from a poem of a poet called Martial, which I really love. It's talking about Rome, Roma. and he's kind of addressing Rome. So Rome is actually in the vocative here. He's kind of personifying Rome, and he says, "Terrarum Dea gentium Roma, cui par est nihil et nihil secundum." So he's addressing Rome. He says, "Rome, goddess of all the lands and nations, to whom nothing is equal and nothing second." So he's kind of glorifying Rome and glorifying the city that he loves. And the word here that's from this chapter is the word par, right? Par means equal. Here it's modifying Rome, to whom nothing is equal. It's kind of modifying nihil, but it's referring back to the word Rome, right? So, just some examples of real Latin words there. Martial was a Roman poet who wrote a specific type of poem called epigrams, as you can see there. Okay. So that does kind of wrap up chapter 34, guys, and explain chapter 34. Again, there might be something here you don't know for sure because you can't ask me a question. So pop into my office hours if you need any help at all. And of course, I will return this week and next week to do some practice exercises and assignments with you guys to make sure we nail this down and you guys understand it even better. So you can look forward to those in the next couple days and next week also. And remember, we have Friday off for Good Friday, so I won't be posting any new assignments or anything that day. Okay. Hope you guys are doing very well. Make sure to stay in touch with me, and I will be back soon to talk to you again. Walete.